Ancient Egypt did not fear death. It prepared for it, worshipped it, decorated it in gold, wrapped it in linen, and promised that beyond the tomb there was another life waiting. That is what we are told. That the Nile gave birth to a civilization obsessed with eternity. That the pyramids were monuments to glory. That the temples were bridges between mankind and the gods. That family, bloodline, and divine order were sacred above all else. And for its sons, that was often true. But for its daughters, the story was very different. Because in the world of the pharaohs, a girl could be born into silk, incense, and royal privilege, and still be marked from the first breath as a tool, an offering, a living piece on a board she would never be allowed to see. Not because she had failed, not because she had sinned, but because in ancient Egypt, a daughter was sometimes considered too valuable to live like a human being. Official history likes to show us the beautiful side. Painted queens, jeweled collars, perfumed chambers, princesses standing beside thrones beneath fan-bearers and lotus flowers. It looks elegant, almost tender, a civilization of refinement, ceremony, and divine femininity. And yes, Egypt did elevate some women higher than many other ancient societies ever dared. Some ruled, some owned land, some commanded temples, but that is exactly what makes the darker truth so difficult to look at. Because behind the polished stone and sacred language was a system that could take a young girl and strip away everything that made life worth living, while telling her it was an honor. A system that could bury a daughter inside ritual, duty, purity, silence, and obedience so complete that by the time she realized what had been taken from her, there was nothing left to reclaim. She could be promised to a god she would never touch, locked inside a temple while still alive, forbidden from love, forbidden from choice, forbidden from motherhood unless it served power. Her body controlled, her future decided, her name rewritten. Sometimes she was married for strategy, sometimes hidden for bloodline, sometimes turned into a vessel of politics, disguised as holiness, and sometimes, the most terrifying fate of all, she was not killed. She was preserved, not in the way tourists imagine, not wrapped in bandages after death, but preserved in function. Preserved as a symbol, preserved as an object of purity, of dynasty, of fear, kept alive physically while everything human inside her was slowly erased. That is why what happened to some daughters in ancient Egypt was worse than death. Death ends suffering. It closes the door. What Egypt perfected was something colder, a life where the door never opened to begin with. And once you begin to follow the records, the tomb reliefs, the temple rolls, the silences in royal lineages, the missing mothers, the daughters who appear in history only to vanish into religious titles and ceremonial shadows, one possibility begins to emerge. Maybe ancient Egypt did not merely honor its daughters. Maybe it consumed them. And the first place where that horror begins is not in a tomb. It begins in the palace. In ancient Egypt, the palace was not just a home. It was a machine. It was a machine built to preserve power, bloodline, legitimacy, and divine control. And inside that machine, a daughter was never simply a child. She was an asset, a symbol, a future alliance, a womb that might secure a dynasty, or a threat that had to be managed before she was old enough to understand what she was. That is the part most people miss. When we imagine ancient royalty, we imagine privilege. Marble floors, gold cups, silk garments, music, in candlelit chambers. And yes, royal daughters had all of that. They lived surrounded by wealth, beyond anything ordinary people could touch. But wealth is not the same as freedom. In many cases, it only made the cage more expensive, because the closer a girl was to the throne, the less her life belonged to her. A royal daughter could be promised in marriage long before she reached womanhood. Not for love, not even for family in the way we understand it. She could be assigned to strengthen a political faction, establish a succession, reinforce divine blood, or protect the illusion that the ruling house was chosen by the gods. In some dynasties, the bloodline itself became an obsession. The family did not merely rule Egypt. It had to remain sacred, sealed, separate. And when that happens, daughters stop being daughters. They become instruments. Official history will tell you that royal women in Egypt held unusual status, that queens could wield influence, that royal daughters were honored members of the court. And again, this is true, but only on the surface, because high status in a sacred monarchy often means something darker than oppression. It means responsibility without escape, visibility without voice, importance without personhood. The daughter of a pharaoh might be dressed like a goddess and still have no right to choose the man who touched her, the temple that claimed her, or the future she was forced to enter. And then there is the silence, that strange silence in the historical record. So many daughters named in inscriptions, shown in reliefs, listed in ceremonial scenes, and then suddenly gone. No clear marriage record, no tomb narrative, no children, no ordinary ending. They appear beside power, and then disappear into titles. God's wife, chantress, royal ornament. Beautiful words, sacred words, but sometimes those titles feel less like honors and more like walls. Because once a daughter entered one of these roles, her life could vanish from the human world while continuing perfectly well on paper. She was still alive, but not her own. Takatatilo gods, wife of Amen. To modern ears, it sounds prestigious, mystical, elevated, but in practice, it could mean a young royal woman was absorbed into the religious machinery of the state so completely that her body, sexuality, and future were no longer private matters. She belonged to ritual, to the temple, to political continuity. In some periods, this role held immense wealth and influence, but influence is not always freedom. Sometimes it is simply a more elegant form of captivity. A daughter could be elevated so high that no ordinary life remained possible. No family of her own, no spontaneous love, no chance to walk away. She was expected to embody purity, ceremony, cosmic order. She was no longer being raised to live. She was being shaped to serve an idea greater than herself. And that is what makes it terrifying. Because suffering is easy to recognize when it arrives in chains and violence. But ancient Egypt often did something more sophisticated. It turned control into beauty. It wrapped obedience in gold. It codes, sacrifice, holiness. It made confinement look like prestige. Imagine being born into that world as a girl. From childhood, servants dressed you. Priests watch you. Scribes record your movements. Your value is discussed in corridors you are not allowed to enter. Men older than your father decide whether you will marry, remain untouched, enter the temple, or disappear into ritual office. Everyone around you speaks of destiny, but no one asks what you want. And if you resist, that is where the palace ends and the temple begins. Because once ancient Egypt decided that a daughter belonged to the gods, there was almost no human power left that could bring her back. The temple in ancient Egypt was not just a place of prayer. It was a center of wealth, law, property, ritual, politics, and fear. A state within the state. And if the palace decided who a daughter belonged to, the temple decided what remained of her after that decision was made. This is where the story becomes colder. Because death, at least, is honest. Death announces itself. It arrives, it ends, it closes the account. But what the temple could do to a girl was different. It could hollow out a life while keeping the body breathing. It could take a daughter at the moment she was supposed to become a woman and suspend her there forever, between honor and erasure. To the public it looked sacred. A daughter dedicated to the gods was not pitied. She was admired. She wore fine linen. She took part in rituals ordinary people would never witness. Her image might be carved into stone. Offerings might be made in her presence. She was presented as pure, elevated, chosen. But chosen by whom? Not by herself. In many cases, these girls entered a world controlled by male priests, royal agendas, and sacred rules so rigid that every part of their existence became symbolic property. Their bodies were no longer private. Their fertility was political. Their virginity could be ceremonial. Their voice mattered only when it echoed the institution that possessed them. And once inside, leaving was not simple. Sometimes it may not have been possible at all. This is where ancient power reveals its true genius. It did not always need prison bars. It used belief, it used the ritual, it used the status. If a daughter was told from childhood that her suffering upheld cosmic order, that her loneliness pleased the gods, that her silence protected Egypt itself, then resistance did not merely become disobedience. It became blasphemy. Think about how devastating that is. A young woman denied ordinary love is one tragedy. A young woman taught to believe that wanting ordinary love makes her impure is something worse, because now the prison lives inside her. Now the walls speak in her own voice, and the deeper you look into the religious roles assigned to elite women, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. Their lives are documented ceremonially, not personally. We know titles, not thoughts, rituals, not feelings, processions, not heartbreak, gold, incense, music, offerings, and behind all of it, almost nothing that sounds human. It is like reading the biography of a sacrifice written by the people who benefited from it. Some daughters were isolated by sacred duty. Others were deployed in highly controlled marriages meant to protect lineage, consolidate rule, or neutralize rival claims. In either case, the outcome was often the same. Her body was not her own future. It was state infrastructure. And then there is something even darker. When a civilization becomes obsessed with purity, it eventually becomes obsessed with containment. Who can touch whom? Who can produce heirs? Which blood is divine? Which woman must remain untouched? Which daughter must be visible? And which one must be hidden? This is how a palace begins to resemble a vault. This is how daughters become sealed assets, preserved for legitimacy, not life. In that world, a girl could remain alive for decades and still never truly live. No freedom to choose love, no freedom to refuse duty, no freedom to build a self outside the role assigned to her before she could speak. She would eat, breathe, walk, perform ritual, age, but she would not belong to herself. And that may be the cruelest achievement of all, because by the time history sees her, she no longer appears as a victim. She appears as an icon, a perfect figure in carved stone. Painted eyes, composed face, sacred posture. No trace of panic, no sign of grief. The suffering has been processed, refined, is turned into culture. That is why so many people miss it. They see magnificence where they should see control. They see prestige where they should see disappearance. They see immortal honor where there may have been a lifelong sentence. And if that were the end of it, it would already be horrifying enough. But ancient Egypt did not only control its daughters while they lived, it found ways to own them even after death. And that is where the story turns from tragic to unbearably. Ancient Egypt was obsessed with eternity. That obsession produced some of the most extraordinary monuments on Earth. Tombs designed like machines for the afterlife. Bodies preserved for thousands of years. Names carved into stone so that memory itself could be forced to survive. Too many people. This sounds beautiful. A civilization refusing to let death erase what it loved. But there is another way to look at it. What if eternity was not always a gift? What if, for some daughters, it was simply the final stage of possession? Because once a royal or sacred woman died, she did not always return to herself. She could be transformed into legacy, into propaganda, into proof that the system had worked exactly as intended. Her body could be preserved, her image idealized, her identity absorbed into the eternal order of dynasty and religion. Even in death, she might remain useful. That is the real horror. Not merely that a daughter could be controlled in life, but that ancient Egypt developed a way to extend that control beyond the grave, to decide how she would be remembered, what parts of her would survive, what parts would vanish, whether she would appear in history as beloved, sacred, fertile, obedient, pure, or not appear at all. An absence in Egypt is never innocent. A missing name in a civilization obsessed with inscription is not a small thing. A vanished woman in a court obsessed with lineage is not a random thing. When a daughter appears in reliefs as a child, then dissolves into silence, history does not become empty, it becomes suspicious. because ancient Egypt recorded what mattered. And when it stopped recording someone, that silence can feel less like forgetfulness and more like design. Some daughters were immortalized, others were erased. Both fates, in their own way, meant the same thing. The system made the final decision. This is why the phrase "worse than death" is not exaggeration. Death is natural. It comes for everyone. But what happened to some daughters of ancient Egypt was more deliberate than death. More ceremonial, more total. They were shaped from birth, allocated by power, enclosed by holiness, stripped of ordinary futures, and then turned into symbols, either polished into eternity or buried in silence. To the outside world, it looked majestic. That is what makes it so effective. The architecture distracts you. The jewelry distracts you. The mythology distracts you. Gold has a way of making cruelty look sophisticated. Ritual has a way of making violence look necessary. Prestige has a way of making captivity look like privilege. And when all three are fused together inside one of history's most admired civilizations, the result is almost impossible to challenge. Because people do not want the beautiful world to be ugly underneath. But some of the ugliest systems in history did not operate through open brutality alone. They operated through reverence, through ceremony, through stories so powerful that the victims themselves could disappear inside them. That may be what happened here. Not to every daughter. Not in every dynasty. Not in every century. Ancient Egypt was vast, complex, and changing. But for enough daughters, in enough places, under enough sacred and royal systems, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Their lives were not destroyed in one dramatic moment. They were slowly converted into service, into purity, into dynastic utility, into holy function, into things. And that is always worse. Because when a civilization kills you, it ends your life. But when a civilization turns you into an object while keeping you alive, preserving your image, controlling your body, and rewriting your memory, it does something colder than murder. It takes your death in installments. So the next time you see the painted face of an Egyptian princess on a temple wall, the next time you hear about divine wives, sacred daughters, royal blood, eternal queens, look again. Ask yourself what she was not allowed to say. Ask yourself who chose her future. Ask yourself whether the gold was decoration or camouflage, and ask the most uncomfortable question of all. In a civilization that promised eternal life, how many daughters were denied the right to ever truly live? Because maybe the most terrifying thing ancient Egypt built was not the pyramid, not the tomb, not the temple. Maybe it was a system so beautiful that the suffering inside it survived for thousands of years without anyone noticing.